Hi everyone, we're back with the Old Toby pipe rack plaque that we started with the last video. In the last video we were just looking at the graphic design layout aspect of things. If you remember, I made sure that I had everything sized up to the way that we needed it in relation to the plaque that we had picked out. And I've moved ahead just a tiny bit, but I'm going to get you all caught up on where we're at with that. So as you can see, we've printed it out. The graphic is, pretty basic as it is because we're going to be using this as a template for transferring a design to the wood that the actual plaque is made up of, actually. So, as you can see, we have all these little dots here. These dots were, I kind of painstakingly put those into place to act as counterpoints for the stems on the pipes, so that when we actually get this all transferred, I'll just mark these little dots, and then the pipe stems will fit, with one on top, one on bottom, and that way they'll hang neatly off the side, hopefully. I have no idea if this is going to work, but when I had the design inside the computer, I took pictures of all the pipes individually that I knew was going to hang on the plaque. I sized them up to real size and just kind of rotated and moved them, and then dropped my points in so I could see where it would hold it. I feel pretty confident about this, but we'll see what's going to happen with the finished project. Now, for the graphic itself, it was a little too big to print on one piece of paper. So what I had to do is I had to divide this into 3 separate pieces, and then just scale them down to 8.5 by 11 inch standard paper size. And we took one section which is cut right about here, and another section which is cut right about here. And so what I did is I took all 3 of these prints, made sure there was a little bit of overlap on it, and then I trimmed them down with my handy X-Acto blade. And then I used a little light table that I have to line everything up and get everything glued down. Now, the interesting thing about working with this, especially when you have overlaps, is the more overlap that you have here, the more you're going to feel a little bit, well, there's a little less impression that's made when you're actually drawing over it. So in the past, I used to just use Scotch tape, just, tape it down on one side, tape it down on the other. But then as I was transferring through it, I found that once I hit these little bumps here, like where they connected, the transfer kind of lightened up a little bit. It caused the pencil to skip a little bit. So I've tried a different technique, and I found these like really cool things at like at a local hobby store. And it's basically just like this. It's a little contraption that has a thin ribbon of adhesive tape on it, and then you just kind of push it down and you roll it across, and it leaves this sticky residue on it. And I was able to put that down, and there's much less to draw over here. Of course, you've still got a little skipping in the paper where it connects, but much less to have to get through, because with the Scotch tape I had to push real hard to get that transfer through. With this, there's still, you still feel a little bit of kind of a lip here, but not enough that I think it's going to cause any problem with transferring it over. I've done it a couple times now, seem to work okay, so that's kind of where I'm at with that right now. Maybe in time I'll get a larger format printer and I'll be able to run a single sheet at this size, but for now, I think I've managed to make it work pretty good. Now, with this, as far as the transfer goes, I'm using a graphite transfer. So one of the big issues that I had at this point in the past when I first started doing this was making sure I didn't transfer on the wrong side. So you've got this kind of, as you can kind of see, it's a little charcoaly, but like there's one side that's kind of I don't know, milky in a way, and then the other side is way darker. So always making sure that the dark side is facing down, because that's what's actually going to transfer onto your piece. Now, the way that also, again, the graphite paper is a little too small for the entire piece of paper, so what I did is I've taken 2 different pieces of graphite paper, lined them up to make sure that my piece will fit entirely over both of them, and then I just took some painter's tape and cut a few little segments here and just attached it to the graphite paper. So now those two pages don't shift, and it holds it on pretty well. So the next step for this is going to be to cut pretty close to the edge of the paper that I already have, and we're going to be cutting through some of the tape as well, which will give me a little bit of leftover, which I always save as much as I can, because not that graphite paper is really all that expensive, but you know, every once in a while you can use a piece of it for scrap or something. So you know, and also with the little seam spot, like where the graphite kind of pulls up here, that's also another bump you have to account for when you're transferring, and it's usually not that bad. So but I always make sure that my first two pieces that I put down land right on that seam where the graphite paper is, to hold those two pieces together so it doesn't go anywhere. And then I just kind of tack it down at the top, the bottom, and since this is a longer one, I've kind of hit the sides an additional 2 times as well, just to keep everything nice and stable. Now, as far as the wood goes, I guess I should talk about the wood prep for this. This is the piece that I'm using, and I can't fit all of it into frame right now, but it's, you know, I pre-measured it before I even did the design, so I knew what I was laying it out to. Last night I took the wood out to the workshop, and I sanded down the front and the back and the exposed sides here with a 220 grit sandpaper, just very light over the top of it, just to get any discoloration off of it, and also to kind of smooth out these bottom parts, because on these pieces of wood the bottom parts are like really gritty, and I want the stain and the sealant to be nice and smooth on that. So I made sure to get that all smoothed out. I also rounded out the edges, just barely, give it a little bit of a bevel, just so it doesn't splinter, or you know, any impact or anything like that doesn't cause it to chip away. Now I like to use live edge wood as often as I can. The only problem with this is that with all the work that I'll be doing with it, the bark can chip away a little bit, and as you can see, some of it's already come off. That just happened the minute I took the shrink wrap off of it. Chunks just started falling out, so I just very gently kind of brushed it over with my hands to make sure that I got any loose pieces off, and it's not as beautiful as I was hoping it would be, but it'll be good enough for this project, I think. Now I also want to make sure that it remains stable while I'm working on it, so I usually put a sealant on it to give it a little bit more toughness, and I decided to use, well, lately I've been using like a clear Mod Podge on it, which has been working quite well. Even if there's like some growth on it, like some moss or something like that, it holds it on pretty well. The only thing I'm not crazy about is it kind of gives it this glossy sheen to it, and I would like to try to find something that's going to have a little bit more of a natural look to the wood, so it doesn't look so plastic, I guess is the best way to describe it. Now the wood itself, it had a little bit, I don't think it's going to come up on camera, maybe, but there's a little indention right in here. It looks like something might have hit it and just kind of dinged it a little bit. I tried sanding that down as much as I could, because I knew I wanted this to be the face of the project, and I think I brought it down a little bit, but there's still a little bit of depression there, so hopefully that won't show up quite as much after we do all the artwork and the staining. It was, whenever I'm picking a side for this, I always try to find the side that has the most visible exposed live edge, so that when it's hanging on the wall, you can see that texture and that color and all that. And if I flip this guy over, you know, you've got this really nice kind of tan line that runs down the side here, which is also nice, but you really don't see as much of the exposed wood. I was kind of debating on which side was going to be my front and which was going to be my back, especially since so many little chunks pulled off of the wood here. I thought, well, maybe I don't want it exposed as much as I would if it had remained on. But as of right now, I'm thinking I'm still gonna keep it with the exposed wood showing. I think that's important for the overall look, especially once the pipes are hanging on it. I don't think anybody's really gonna notice any of the like missing sections, and you know, if I'm being completely honest, it doesn't really look all that bad. So the next thing I'm going to do now is just trim this down. I just need to cut this. Now, when I'm cutting this, I'm always going to leave a little bit of room for the graphite there, just so that it overlaps and it's not like still flush underneath. I want the tape to hold onto that graphite to keep this entire design held into place. And then once I get that done, I'm going to drop it on top of the wood, and then I'm going to throw on some more pieces to hold both the graphite and the paper onto the wood. Now, the best thing with this part is always make sure that when you're cutting, you're using a freshly sharp X-Acto blade. I am not listening to my own advice on this case, but I just changed this one out not too long ago, so I'm confident everything will be fine as far as this goes. So we're just going to remove the excess. Now, if you're going to be moving this, keep in mind that the graphite side of it is laying face down. So if you move it around too much, you might scuff it up. You might lose some of that graphite that you need to be able to do the transfer. So what I do is I take the tip of my X-Acto blade and I put it between the graphite paper and the artwork, and I just lift it up, and then I can grab underneath of it gently, and I can spin it around where I need it. And then I'm always holding the paper down with one finger so it doesn't bunch and tear. And especially when I get to the taped areas, I slow down a little bit, apply a little bit more pressure just to make sure I get a nice clean cut through it. There's not really a whole lot of technique to that I'm sure I need to tell you guys about. I'm sure you can kind of figure it out on your own. But we're just being very gentle with this until we get it laid down into position. So we're finishing up the last little bit here. Take that off. And as you can see, we have the graphite paper attached to the artwork. It's still in one piece. We're going to lay this down onto the wood. So what I do is, again, use the tip of the X-Acto blade to reach between the graphite paper and the design. Pick it up. Gently put my finger under it so I can pick it up. We're being very gentle at this point. And I'm also holding right up here where the seam is to hold everything together. And what I'm going to do is just slide this one piece underneath. And I'm going to gently lay this on top. And there we go. So now all I have to do is get this lined up to make sure everything is nice and straight. And as you can see, I'm using a cutting mat underneath of it. And the reason for this is because this cutting mat has lines already done onto it, so I just need to line it up. I usually do the bottom flush because that's how it's going to be hanging. I like this to be flush. And from this point, there's really not a whole lot of science to this. I'm just going to kind of eyeball it and kind of get it into the position that I need to. Now I've already sized it up according to the way it looks on the design on the computer, so everything's pretty straight. I'm looking for equal spacing from the sides, from the edge to the side on both sides, and then from the bottom and the top. And I'm feeling we're right about there. So that feels pretty good. Now, when it comes to this part, you want to get it tacked down into at least 2 key points to keep it from shifting so it doesn't move on you. So what I do is take a little bit of painter's tape here, and I'm just going to gently hold down on top of it to hold it from moving out of place. Then I'm going to take the tape and I'm going to lay it over the design, the graphite paper, and the wood so it tacks it down into place. I'm going to do that. And before I tack the bottom, which should be next, to keep that at 2 separate points and level, I'm just going to double check the layout again, make sure everything looks nice and straight. Don't want to adjust anything too much. That looks good. And then I'm going to tack it again down here at the bottom, making sure to cover the paper, the graphite, and the wood. Now we've got that solidly into place. So what we're going to do now is just kind of go through, and we're going to hit it with a couple more pieces here and there just to make sure everything gets tacked down properly. And you don't have to really overdo it. Just make sure that you're going to be tacking it down in areas where it's going to keep from pulling up too much. Make sure that it's not going to get caught on anything or tear. So you can cut your pieces a little bit larger at this point to accommodate for the graphite and for the wood, to make sure that there's enough to cover all that. And always make sure that whenever you're placing your tape, you're not placing it over any part of the design. Having to draw through the tape causes not as great of a transfer. You're going to have some issues with it. So we're just going to kind of go through and do this. Now, I usually find that when I get to this stage of the project that I pre-cut all my painter's tape into the segments that I'm going to need, at least as many as I can, but did not cut enough this time. So what I do is, also the cutting mat that I use is a self-healing cutting mat. It's like the same that you'd use for, like, you know, maybe a Cricut cutter or something like that. These are great because you can cut directly on them with X-Acto blades. And I just found out recently I have a self-healing cutting mat in my workshop, and I've been using a box cutter on it, you know, to break down boxes and things, and found out that that's actually not a great idea because you can go ahead and really damage the mat, and then it cuts all the way through, and then you have all sorts of issues. So I've had the thing about 3 years, and I'm already at a point where I need to replace it because I've been just a little overly abusive with it. So for the this cutting mat, I'm only using X-Acto blades and using a very, well, as minimal pressure as I can use to make my cut without having to cut all the way down through the mat itself. So yeah, you just take care of your art supplies, folks, I guess. And so we're taping this guy down, and as I said, I'm just taping like some of the key points, you know, just every so often, just, you know, little hinge points here. And we're almost done. I do recommend maybe hitting the corners more than anything else, just to keep them from lifting up and tearing away, anything like that. But you do what feels comfortable for you. Now, I mean, at this point right now, I've done enough that if I were to start the transfer process now, I'd probably be fine. But you want to make sure you keep it nice and flat, no bubbles or you know, wrinkles or anything like that. You want to keep it as close to the media as you can. And that way you can be sure that you can get the best transfer that you can. So I think that looks good. This might even be a little excessive, but I think it'll be fun. So now the whole process is we've got the graphite paper facing down, of course. We want the shiny side to be facing down onto the wood. We've got the design on top of it. Got enough coverage to make sure that anything that we trace over to do the transfer is going to transfer the graphite onto the wood. And now I get to go through the painstaking process of taking a pencil. I usually use a fine tip mechanical pencil to go over and just draw all the outlines. And you know, as far as the solid fill stuff here, you know, I have found that it's not really great to try and fill all that in when you're doing the transfer process. And the reason why is when you go back through with your wood burner, that graphite tends to act as a barrier between the wood burner tip and the wood, and it usually pulls up a bunch of, you know, it has to burn through that graphite, so it creates a lot of residue on the tip of your wood burner. So the less that you can put on here to do the transfer pattern, the better. So probably what I'm going to do is, you know, just do the outlines around these things. Once I get into the details here, especially like the real thin materials, like the real thin parts right here, I might just black those in. Just, you know, it's easier for the transfer and how the translation goes. But for these big wide open spots here, like the lettering will just be outlined around the outside, and then, you know, we'll have, you know, the kind of the overlapping outline here as well. And the important thing is after you do the transfer, especially if you're not filling in the actual solid parts, which again I don't recommend, the important thing is always keep your artwork visible when you're doing the actual wood burning, so that way you can use it as a reference to look at and go, oh, okay, I need to make sure that I fill that in dark, and I need to make sure that I do this. And you can kind of do like a side-by-side comparison with it to make sure that you're filling in the spots that you need to fill in. There was one time I think I started burning something and I didn't transfer it properly, or I started burning something. And you know, like with any art project, you're going to hit hiccups every now and again, and you just kind of have to self-correct and adjust and maybe modify things to make it work. But I found keeping the actual image down in, you know, you can either have it printed. I usually just keep this. So like when I'm done transferring, I just keep the paper design that I've printed out for reference. But you can also have it in, in your phone or on your iPad or something like that, so you can use it. Whatever way works for you is fine. But just to make sure that, like, when you're getting through the actual burning process, like, you start at an area where you're like for this one, I'll probably start blacking in the letters first, and then probably do the outline around the entire thing, and then just kind of build the color into it. I'm not crazy excited about doing this because it is so fine, but if I take my time, I think it's going to look great. So next process, we're going to transfer. I'll see if I can do a time-lapse video for some of that. I'm not going to make you guys watch that whole process because it'll be pretty excruciating for both of us if I did. But for now, this is what we've done. We've taken our design, we've printed it up, we've sectioned it out, we've attached it together to create the overall full design. I do recommend using a light table for that. I mean, if you're kind of in a pinch, you can always line it up on a window with a strong light source, and it kind of acts the same way. But since this is something I do fairly often, I have a light table that I use. It's a really nice flat piece, LED piece that has adjustable dimming and lighting touch response to it. So I recommend getting one of those. They're not too expensive, but if you're going to be doing this long term, then that's something I would probably recommend. Now you might also notice that I've got these like little hash marks here on the side. The reason for that, and this is the first time I tried this, was when I'm seaming pieces of paper together, I want to make sure they line up properly. So usually what I do is I line them up on the light table, and I get everything matched in, is make sure that everything connects properly within the graphic. Now this one's a little bumped to the side, but not noticeably enough. It's something I can correct during the transferring process, so I'm not too worried about it. What I did is, once I got the two pieces laid together, I went through with a pencil and I made these marks so that I could see where they overlap. So when I went to go actually put the two pieces together to seal it down, all I had to really do was line up these marks to make sure that I made them complete marks again, because there's some on one side, some on the other. Just match them up, and that usually gets me right in the wheelhouse. The tackiness that I use, the adhesive that I use to seam it together is pretty instantaneously bonding, so the minute it touches that paper, it could potentially tear and cause me to have to reprint it again. So I wanted to make sure that I had kind of a backup way to make sure that I was keeping my alignment proper. I'm just going to leave these on. You can erase them if that's your thing, but I just left them on. At the end, I'm just working on the main design so they don't distract me too much. So anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching, and hopefully the next video will be a little bit of time lapse of me actually doing the transfer pattern, and then once I have that all transferred, we'll do a little bit more with the actual wood burning when I get to that. Thanks so much.